So welcome once again to this talk. The plan is to have such seminars on a monthly basis. It's going to be once a month on Tuesdays from 1 to 2 p.m. And this is, as I said, this is the inaugural talk of a SustainERA's research talks series. Our first speaker, I'm really happy to welcome Dr. Lauri Peterson in Estonian, who's a senior research fellow at the Center of Climate Change, Energy and Environmental Law, University of Eastern Finland, and he's also affiliated as a researcher at the Department of Government at Uppsala University. We are extremely happy to have you with us this afternoon, especially because Lauri also is a member of the advisory board of the SustainERA project. So Lauri's been has done research on climate governance at international, national, as well as subnational levels. And this afternoon, he will talk about his research uh, entitled A Symphony of Efforts, a Voluntary Climate Initiatives and Subnational Climate Action. So the plan is that Laurie will speak about roughly 45 minutes, and we hope to have some discussion at the end of his talk. So all of you will have a chance to ask questions. And also, if you don't want to speak up or if there won't be any chance to ask questions, you can also use the chat to post your questions in the chat, and Kertu and I, we try to keep an eye on the chat as well. And as with any online seminars, please make sure to be muted during a talk so that Lauri can present his research without any interruptions. So welcome once again, and without any further ado, I'm happy to give the floor to Lauri. Welcome. We are very excited to hear more about your research.
Thank you, Anu, for that introduction. Let me just open up the slides. All right. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this public research talk series. And thank you, Professor Anu Realo, for the invitation, and everybody else at the SustainERA team. I have personally found it very interesting how we have a lot of different expectations about the nature and impacts of climate policies. But we tend to have, I think, generally less evidence of actual impacts of these policies. So a good example, I think, of this are voluntary climate initiatives and their impact on subnational climate action. And this is something I'll be talking about today, about testing some of these notions that we have, let's say, theoretically, and what actors achieve when their climate efforts are voluntary, that meaning that they're not strictly regulated top-down. Rather, it's more of a bottom-up process. So what are some of the potential implications of voluntary climate initiatives in that case? Okay, so I'll give a kind of a rundown introduction to the climate governance challenge. I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by high integrity, which is going to be kind of a key concept here as well. I'll introduce the Achieve project that I'm part of as well, because I think that will give us a little bit of a context on the research that I'm working on and we're working on at UEF. And this kind of leads to the questions about how effective really are voluntary climate initiatives, and I'll provide some preliminary evidence on that, and we'll have a discussion after a while. So I think we have a very enormous challenge ahead of ourselves, and I'm sure a lot of the people listening in, they already know about the kind of the gigantic size of the climate challenge. And we have a policy challenge in the form of the 2050 net zero targets, which are established by the Paris Agreement to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees. So this is quite an enormous challenge, especially now with the current geopolitical turbulence, decline in multilateralism. And one of the kind of big expectations here has been that non-state actors will fill the gap, meaning subnational actors and also private companies. So the overall goal of voluntary climate action has been to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also to build climate resilience and lowering the risks of exceeding warming limits. This has, since the Paris Agreement and even before that, has stimulated a launch of a large number of transnational initiatives, which in this case I call voluntary climate initiatives, but also have been referred to in the literature as transnational networks or cooperative climate initiatives. And there's a large heterogeneity of these initiatives. So, for example, Race to Zero, which is a global campaign, and it's led by the UN climate change high-level champions, which aims at rallying non-state actors, including companies, cities, regions, also financial, educational, and healthcare institutions, to take immediate action to halve global emissions by 2030 and to deliver a healthier, fairer, zero carbon world. There's other initiatives such as the Action Towards Climate-Friendly Transports, which is aimed at speeding up the deployment of electric vehicles in cities. There's also a Resilient Cities initiative, which aims to strengthen the resilience of urban systems, reducing vulnerability risks and preparing inhabitants to climate or disaster risks. So quite a big variety of different initiatives working on different levels of governance here. So this coming from research that me and my team at UVF, but also part of the Achieve project, which I'll talk a little bit more, I've been working on, is kind of mapping out this voluntary climate action around the world on a global level. And what we can see is that kind of the amount of these initiatives being launched, it's almost a linear growth taking place in the world since 2013. We were also kind of gathering and mapping the last years, but at least until 2023, and we don't see really a big drop off taking place later yet. But there's the number of cumulative amount of initiatives is pretty high already. So it's this mapping is looking at climate initiatives which are active at least in 2 different countries and have at least 2 different actor participants. So what are these initiatives focus areas? So what do they really do? So there's quite a nice distribution of different focus areas. As we can see, sort of the key ones here being actually knowledge dissemination. So disseminating knowledge about, for example, climate technology or climate knowledge. So it's one of the key issues here. Also, institutional capacity building, technical implementation, policy planning, funding, and also a key initiative goal is enhancing standards and norms. So kind of enhancing the standards and norms of the participants, whether they are, subnational cities or are they companies or other types of actors. Interestingly, some other types of focus are getting less attention. So we look at product development and training. They seem to get a lot less attention. So the main focus is clearly on mitigation, as you can see, the dark blue line, and it's less on adaptation. Although I can say, as you can see, the overlap there with the light blue is adaptation still often is a very kind of strong secondary objective for a lot of initiatives. So where is all of this implemented? So interestingly enough, although we would expect a very broad sort of global distribution here, but in terms of instances of implementation, we see that it's very much still based in high income countries. There's kind of a regional geographic sort of distribution very clearly here. Even we can see there's a clear distinction between the West and East of Europe. So, so there's still a very strong sort of global north dominance here, as versus more focus on the global south. Also, I think key is like where's the funding coming from? Where's the money coming from? So here we can see that different initiatives that are based in different types of regions. There's also the international group, so initiatives that are engaged in work across the globe, or across regions. But we see at least here that it's in these global kind of initiatives, they're very much mainly funded by international organizations. So UN organizations or other types of international organizations, World Bank, etc. When we look at in other regions, and we know that Europe is very sort of has a lot of very large number of initiatives, we see that in this case, especially, it's national governments. So it's a lot of European governments themselves that are funding these initiatives. So there's a discussion about sort of state-led initiatives almost in this case, rather than just kind of these non-governmental organizations. We look at other regions, then it's kind of similar, but especially in Northern America, there's a lot of international NGOs that are involved in funding these, and in other regions as well. Its distribution becomes more diverse there. What about accountability? So we can look at accountability of these initiatives as well. We can measure that in terms of internal accountability, so meaning how many of the initiatives within this focus group do they have the members have control over the leadership, and in external accountability, seeing at how many of these initiatives in this group have monitoring arrangements in place. And what we can kind of see here, kind of I've made circles around there, we can see that knowledge dissemination initiatives tend to have more robust monitoring mechanisms, as well as more membership requirements. But when we look at funding initiatives or lobbying initiatives, then we see that there's a lower external and average internal accountability in place. And this kind of leads us to the next issue, which is integrity. So high integrity is something that we're very much focused on. And all of this kind of brings the question. So how strong really is the integrity of voluntary climate action? The full potential of voluntary climate action can only be realized when integrity-related concerns are overcome. And integrity is a very complex concept. It can be contextual. And what I can tell you is that it definitely goes beyond simply following rules. It's more about being consistent with core values, such as ethical consistency, honesty, and trustworthiness, despite pressures or trade-offs. And also key is to understand that integrity doesn't mean just formal standards. It also is fair, transparent, and ethically sound climate action. Why is this important to think about? Especially because there's a big issue of greenwashing that's at bay here, right? And especially we discuss something that I personally look less at, but a lot of my colleagues look at, which is carbon credits and offsets, is the issue of how well are these actions actually achieving their aims or in an ethical, high integrity fashion. And these are just some examples from this year, actually, where we see a lot of companies or even cities being kind of called out for greenwashing, which is the practice of making actions or products appear more sustainable than they really are. So I'll give a short overview of the project that we're working on, give you some context on that, and do a little bit of promotion as well. So we have a consortium of 12 partners combining universities, but also policy institutions, modeling organizations, and data collection organizations. Our main goal is to identify opportunities to strengthen and scale up high integrity voluntary climate action and to contribute to achieving net zero emissions by mid-century in the EU and globally in general. Here, our main goal is kind of the high integrity is the central component here. We want to make sure that voluntary climate commitments by non-state actors are high integrity. And high integrity is very sort of multifaceted, as I already said. So we are expecting it to be aligned with Paris Agreement, that the voluntary climate commitments are urgent, ambitious, they prioritize emission reductions, are based on science and indigenous knowledge, have a risk-based approach, are credible, take into account equity and justice, transparency and accountability, and are to achieve and continue on net zero path. We have a framework. Just gonna not go too deep into this, but we have an integrity framework for voluntary climate action, which has three main pillars. So integrated accountability, justice and equity, growth within limits, and environmental robustness. So these consisting of other indicators and issues. So in terms of accountability, we look at targets being coherent and policy and governance being there. So all these different pillars to look at specific aspects of high integrity as well that we work towards. The consortium is interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary. So we have applied natural science and social science scholars working together, and we're integrating different disciplines from these different fields as well. So we also work with co-creation of societal stakeholders. Okay, so this brings a question, something that I'm working more on, which is how effective really is voluntary climate action, and how effective are voluntary climate initiatives in terms of subnational climate action. So the overall, I think, expectation is that the voluntary climate initiatives, which participants join voluntarily, that they help drive increased target setting, or they provide stronger climate commitments by the participants in these initiatives. There's a lot of literature on this, but there's a less, I think, evidence on that actually shows this is taking place, because it's very difficult to study. And because of that, I think still authors such as Bush and Heikkinen also bring out that it's still unclear whether these initiatives or these networks are actually having beneficial effect on voluntary action. And this brings us to the main research gaps. So I think there's kind of two gaps here that I identify. First being that if there's a causal impact of voluntary climate initiatives on cities, what is that actually like? And the second gap being something that I've been working on, which is if these initiatives actually have different types of functions that they are supposed to achieve, then we cannot look at them as simply as a monolith. We have to look at these different functions that they have and try to understand how those functions are being achieved on the ground, on the city level. And we don't know much about that either. I draw on the orchestration lens. So orchestration works through a kind of a RIT model, which is regulator intermediary target model, meaning that we have, well, for our purposes at least, we have kind of these orchestrators, these states and IOs that are either funding or launching voluntary climate initiatives. And these initiatives are serving kind of different functions, right? So some of them are about norm and target enhancement. Some of them are about institutional capacity building. Some are focused on knowledge sharing. Others focused on policy planning. And this is supposed to have impacts on these targets, which in our case are cities. We can think about the using this orchestration lens, we can think about the different initiatives as kind of like an orchestra. So there's different parts of the orchestra, different sections, and they're kind of playing together the symphony, but they all have kind of a different role to play. They have a different role to play in this orchestra. So in this case, this orchestrators, in this case, especially the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and states kind of starting or influencing these initiatives, and then they should be influencing the actors in different ways. This leads to the main kind of research question. So what is really the effect of these voluntary climate initiatives on subnational climate outputs? And do these initiatives have an heterogeneous effect on cities given their varied functions? And I think this is something that hasn't been researched quite enough. A lot of focus has been on certain aspects of these initiatives, some of maybe dominant aspects. But as you saw, the earlier graphs that I showed what kinds of functions there exist and how many initiatives are trying to achieve these functions, then we can see that it's quite evenly spread out for many of those functions. So I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a few dominant initiative functions. And we focus on a particular case to at least to answer the first research gap. And that is the Global Covenant of Mayors. It's one of the largest, actually the largest voluntary climate initiative focused on cities. Started out as a Covenant of Mayors in Europe and expanded from there onwards. It's reports having 12,500 cities as its members, so all across the world. Now it's perhaps even more because it's growing by time. It claims to represent 1 billion people, especially by including some of the largest cities within it. It has specific requirements for members. So it actually requires participants to have measurable climate mitigation targets and climate action plans, have to report on them. And it also has a common reporting framework. So it has all these different types of institutions in place, which should be supporting climate action. So it's kind of the best case scenario or kind of a critical case here. But we develop other hypotheses. So the main hypothesis related to this Global Covenant of Mayors, especially, is we would expect that cities are more likely to adopt a city-level climate mitigation target after they become members of the Global Covenant of Mayors. But in terms of functions, we also pick four here, some four key ones. And we make some theoretical expectations about them, conjecture, and kind of the second hypothesis being cities that are participating in norms or standard setting initiatives should have more ambitious, formalized quantitative mitigation targets. Also argued that cities that are part of knowledge dissemination initiatives should have more innovative or experimental climate mitigation targets. The fourth hypothesis is that cities that are part of institutional capacity building initiatives ought to adopt a reporting mechanism or have adopted a reporting mechanism, to be precise. Cities which are in policy planning initiatives ought to have submitted a climate action plan. How do we do this? How do we study this? So we draw on two main sources of data. For individual, or let's say city level data, we draw on the Net Zero Tracker database, which is organized by Oxford University, Next Climate, and some other organizations. And they have data, we draw data from them from 2024, and they have 1,180 of the largest cities in the world, and they have information on them. So it's basically all cities in the world that have a population over 500,000 inhabitants. This obviously leads to a lot of like regional distribution things as well, which we have to account for. And we have data on city level climate mitigation targets, but we also have on other aspects about those cities. So we have also their population, we have whether they have climate action plans, whether they have monitoring frameworks. So we have a lot of information on those cities. And we connect that with the COACT database, which used to be called the NCICD database, but actually just recently, I think a month ago, was renamed to COACT. And also we have data from 2024 from them, and this is on over 900, but particularly for the cities, for our purposes, it's 61 initiatives. And we have data on initiative level targets there. So we have data on what the initiatives are doing and what kind of functions they have and other information on them. We kind of combine those data sources, and we have sort of a city initiative database of 1,180 major cities and within 142 countries that are part of 61 different voluntary climate initiatives. Okay, what kind of methods do we use? So in order to answer the first hypothesis, which is about understanding whether GCOM, which is the largest initiative, as I said, whether that becoming a member of GCOM actually leads to a adoption of a climate mitigation target. So we use we have data also on GCOM's, the date that cities become members of GCOM, and we have the date of when the city adopted a climate mitigation target. So we can actually kind of exploit that information. And because of that, we can use a Cox proportional hazards model. So we're actually timing the date that the city became a member of GCOM, and also when they actually adopt the target. So we can see if there's a connection between those two things or not. For the second to fifth, so the function level analysis, we use all cities that are part of all types of initiatives from the COACT database. And we do a multivariate regression analysis there. So we look at whether being part of one initiative leads to certain results or not. As you'll see in the next slides, there's certain controls we have to use. So we use GDP, city GDP data, so city wealth. We use population data. Even though these are like really large cities, all of them, there's quite a lot of variation between them, obviously, as well. So you have cities that have 10 million people, but others that have 500,000. So that's a pretty big gap as well. And also we look at region, especially, with descriptive statistics, we can see that there's very big gaps when it comes to EU and China, for example. So China has a lot of cities large cities, but generally Chinese cities are not allowed to take part of global voluntary climate initiatives. So that's something we have to account for. And we cluster standard errors on the country level. Okay, so we look at GCOM membership. So this is just for Global Covenant of Mayors. So this is not for all the initiatives. Then we can see that it's quite, there's a very strong representation by Europe. So the green ones, and there's a very sort of strong distribution of cities that have climate mitigation targets in North America and Latin America. So we see quite a big distribution of that, where cities have targets and where they don't have targets. We can look at cumulative GCOM membership over time. Then we see that obviously European memberships have kind of started earlier, and that's something to account for already since 2008. And there's been like an explosive expansion of membership there over time. And in other regions, we see also like it's just it started at different moments in time. There's been a huge influx of members, and there's some regions that are obviously kind of more lagging behind. But these regions are not equal size, all of them, to keep that in mind as well. So this graph does not show you the share of cities in a region. It shows the number of them. Okay, so the results side. So what we find is using this Cox survival model, which actually has been, I think originally started using it in medicine, I think, to see when do patients survive certain situations. But we're using it instead of survival. We're looking at probability of not adopting a target. It's kind of the opposite way around. But basically, it's showing us what is the probability that a city has not yet adopted a climate mitigation target, so the event over time. Cities that become members of GCOM, so that's the blue line here, are generally more likely to adopt city-level climate mitigation targets. So the survival curve kind of steps down more steeply there. Therefore, the cities that don't become members of GCOM. The hazard ratio, the HR, basically means that being a member slightly accelerates policy adoption compared to being a non-member. But I have to keep in mind here that 85% of GCOM members, and keeping in mind that they have kind of a responsibility to adopt a mitigation targets, 85% of them still lack a target by the end of this database. So by 2024, they have not, 85% of them not have adopted a climate target. Versus non-members, which is 95%. So 95% of non-members have adopted a climate mitigation target. I have to be more precise. So it's a quantitative climate mitigation target that we're talking about. Okay, so we look at VCI functions. So the hypothesis 2 to 5. Keeping in mind both cases here, we control for wealth, we control for population size, and also the region where the city is from. For these regression models, we only include initiative participants. So this is not a comparison of initiative versus non-initiative members. Cities participating in norms, standard setting VCIs are more likely to adopt more ambitious, formalized quantitative mitigation targets than cities that are part of other initiatives. Cities in knowledge disseminating VCIs are not more likely to adopt more innovative targets, interestingly. Also, similarly, we see with the monitoring initiatives that we don't see them more likely to cities to adopt monitoring mechanisms. However, cities that are part of policy planning initiatives are more likely to report a climate action plan. than cities that are part of other initiatives. Okay, so in effect, the main kind of findings here is that these large voluntary climate initiatives do seem to drive city level target adoption. We found that it's a 6.3-year lag generally between becoming a member and adopting a target on average. And we don't really see knowledge or capacity building initiatives having a very strong impact. It can be the case that they have some other types of impacts that we don't account for, but based on our measures at least. We look at norm setting VCIs, norm and target setting VCIs, then we see that they tend to raise ambition via benchmarks and standards. And policy planning initiatives do tend to drive climate action plans, or at least associated with stronger climate action plans on the city level. And this means that, it's a kind of a disjointed symphony, if to say this kind of use this metaphor. Participation does not necessarily mean more significant change always, but deeper connections and obviously deeper work is needed here. And this brings the question whether the orchestra is still kind of incomplete. We need sort of deeper engagement here. So some I think, food for thought here. But I think there are some positive messages here and some kind of frustrating messages as well. So I would actually finish here. Maybe I'm a little bit earlier, but thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions or comments.
Thank you so much. I mean, that was super interesting, and thank you for leaving us some time for discussion. So I'm sure people have questions. So whoever wants to go first, please raise your hand. Holike, seems to have a question. So Holike, please go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks so much, and thanks for the presentation, which I find really interesting. I had quite a lot of thoughts, and I'm not going to share all of them now. But maybe as the first question, what I wasn't exactly clear. It wasn't clear to me what your theory of change is. So the idea is that we're gonna have the more cities are gonna have these targeted options, right? And then we're gonna have some sort of reduction in emissions through that, right? First of all, I'm not sure if that theory of change holds. First of all, I'm not sure if more targets actually matter. I mean, what we've seen is that you talk about the rise in these initiatives, and they're pretty much co-occurred with a massive rise in emissions, right? So since 2008, I mean, we've had massive emissions, right? And where cities have actually we've seen some cities do better than others, right, in terms of targets, but even having targets or 2050 targets actually hasn't necessarily led to any reduction. So I'm very curious about the outcomes that you have there. I would also, well, critics would argue, like Blue Dawn, for example, or Hausknost, that actually it's rather a part of this simulation of sustainability, and that there's actually a glass ceiling, to the environmental state. So since the 1990s, we've seen more kind of states and local governments and so on take up this language of sustainability, and actually that hasn't led to any change. And if anything, it's made people feel more kind of like, oh, we're doing something, it's fine. And where we have had small changes, small efficiency changes, these actually aren't nearly enough to stop anything. So we're kind of focusing all our efforts on these like small efficiency gains and so on and targets. And actually, what we're not doing is kind of directly challenging the core drivers of the environmental crisis, economic growth, production and so on, the interests of capital. And I was wondering, I mean, I saw that you had this the point about growth within limits, and I wasn't sure what that meant. And I will stop here because this is already quite a lot, but I would be curious about how you deal with these contradictions. And of course, I think in environmental politics, there has been kind of a sea change in this field, and kind of much more criticism this sort of liberal environmental state approach, because we've kind of seen the limits of it and what it can achieve. So I just wonder how you, situate the project and what you're doing in terms of these debates. Thanks so much.
Okay, should I respond, or are we planning on gathering more questions? Okay. Thank you, Haliki. Thank you for those questions, or I would say perhaps also concern about where is all of this kind of leading to. I think in terms of theory of change, I think we're kind of drawing and also questioning some of these arguments that are made about these voluntary climate initiatives, especially in terms of I think we're kind of focusing here on policy ambition, and we're focusing here on trying to see if this actually is leading to kind of policy ambition in the first place. So our goal is to sort of pinpoint that first. But I agree with you that in the sense that we should be, especially in the future, and I think data is really good nowadays on this, should be focusing more on implementation side as well. So what is the actual impact on greenhouse gas emission reductions, right? But that's not something that we're really kind of interrogating here. Our kind of, I think our perspective is more in terms of are we at least reaching towards that like first step, which is policy kind of change with these initiatives or not? And it seems somewhat happening in some ways, it seems, but whether that's leading to actual reductions, that's something that's kind of outside the bounds of this task, let's say, of this project. I think that's a interesting question to ask, but nevertheless.
Thank you. Thank you, Haliki, for your interesting question and Lauri for your answer. So Leif seems to be next on my screen. Hand is up. So Leif, please go ahead.
Also, thank you for an interesting presentation, and to an extent it touches issues that I'm also interested in as a researcher, although I have a more, let's say, qualitative and contextual perspective. But also with a quantitative perspective, one could imagine that one factor of importance would be the attitudes and policies of local regimes. You showed us very nicely how these activities are funded mostly by Westerners. Europe, North America, international is probably also mostly Western, and implemented in diverse locations. But if the West pays, and let's say some Arabian or African association is or city is implementing, quite big difference could be made out of local governments or national regimes' attitude. Are they supporting? Are they neutral? Are they against? This might impact scalability, sustainability, so on, so on. Have you had a look on anything like that? There are different attitudes of the regimes in the developing world towards climate policies. And if you have, are there any messages?
Yeah, thank you, Leif. I think this is something that I'm definitely interested in myself, and this was something that I tried to kind of look more into, especially in the beginning when I started this. I think So I guess there's several sides to your question. So I think one side, we try to take into account this variation using these kind of regional and country level controls. So we're not controlling necessarily for like we're not controlling for perhaps political regimes or incumbent left right. So we're not looking at those necessarily because that's we either don't have access to that data on like the city level, or we are on the national level. It gets a bit more complicated, but we do control for regional and country level effects, and I think that covers covers most of it, to be honest. Also, we're dealing with other things that we have to take into account because it's a global sample. Is we don't have access to like public opinion data on all the countries that we look at, and we don't have. There's some other data restriction issues here as well, but this is something obviously very interesting, and I think the domestic sort of conditions are key as well. It's a global analysis, and we have to take into account it's over quite many years, and it is there's also countries where the connection between, let's say, the federal level or city level policies can be very diverse as well, as we know in the US case, right? So that's something we try to control for these like country level and regional controls, at least I think.
So you have various controls, but have you any results, or you didn't research it eventually?
I think this is something that we would like to research eventually, or I would like to research eventually. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Brilliant. Any other questions? I don't see any hands. So I'm going to ask a question myself, which is more about methodology, because maybe I missed something. Lauri, I think you explained everything really, really well, but when it was about the sample size, I think there are still some gaps in my sort of understanding. So maybe if you could just clarify a few things, because I took some notes, and I think you said that the GCOM initiative has like 12,000 something members. Is this what you said? Like different cities? So this is a starting point, like 12,500 cities are part of this initiative. Is this right?
Yes, it's I kind of slipped over all of that discussion to not go into too much detail because of time restrictions,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
but
this is a starting point. So, but in your sample, in the end, it was like your sample was like 10 times smaller. So I was wondering how representative it is of all the cities who are part of this GCOM network. And in the end, when you presented the findings, using the Cox regression model, and you were comparing cities which were part of initiatives and the ones which were not part of initiative, I was also a bit like confused. What was sort of like, I don't know, I mean, how many cities were part of initiatives, and was it like 50-50? What was sort of like, if you could maybe just say a few words about how did you derive your sample, how representative it is, and is it like a final analysis were based on 1,200 cities, roughly speaking? Is it what you used in your analysis?
yeah, I'd love to explain that. So it should be pretty easy to explain. Basically, GCOM has over 12,500 members, but we have members of all types of sizes and all, of cities there. What we have data on is the largest major cities. So we use we only focus on the largest cities in the world, so over 500,000 in population. But GCOM has a lot of members which are a lot smaller than that. So these results, they kind of pertain to the largest cities in the world. And we focus on 1,180 cities. And for that sample, it's kind of nice to use that sample because it's more comparable within that sample. So it's more easy to compare. So when we're looking at members and non-members, we're looking within that large city sample. So we're not comparing kind of apples and pears. We're trying to compare apples with apples in that sense.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So the information about GCOM having 12,500 members, that's more good to know information.
Okay, good. Thank you. That explains it at least to some extent. So thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and I see that Kai wants to ask a question. Kai, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lauri, for this excellent presentation and being the first at our series of talks. And my question comes in relation with your teams and our team's collaboration points. And when I was looking at your slides, I noticed that particularly these training initiatives and also the knowledge-related initiatives somehow have not advanced. Nevertheless, there were the activities. And I wonder, you have access of already probably sorted quite a large database. Do you see opportunities of diving into certain dimensions in it, such as into let's say, people-related, learning-related, training, education, knowledge sharing dimensions in it? And maybe how do you see like sharing this database between our project and your project? Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. Yes, I mean, I think there's a lot more that can be studied here, and this is kind of, in some ways, I think one of the first steps into studying this. We have quite a lot of different plans to kind of interrogate this data we have further, and especially with the COACT database, which is my colleague Sandra Chan is leading, but they're still kind of updating the database at the moment. So we've kind of pushed further work a bit forward because they're still kind of working on updating all the information necessary from a few years ago. But yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of collaboration points here, and I think there's a lot of things that can be studied. The crucial point is that we don't know too much about what these initiatives are really doing, and we don't maybe know too much about what the actual kind of impacts of that work can be like. So also in terms of implementation, as Heilike was pointing out here. So I think there's a lot of avenues of research here.
Is this database open or semi-open, or is it closed?
It's going to be, I think, published by the end of this year. I think it's going to coincide with the COP in Brazil.
Excellent. Thank you. I think we should end this seminar because it's 4 minutes to 2 by the local time. So thank you, Lauri, once again for being the first speaker of our new research talk series. Thank you all for your participation. And we will be announcing future seminars fairly soon. So please stay tuned. And we hope to see many of you again next month and in the coming months. So thank you all and have a great afternoon.